Hello everyone, welcome to the Pedestrian Podcast series. I'm Nabeel Ramji, I'm a field pedestrian, and I'm so thrilled to be joined by Dr. Brian Sinclair from Calgary. Dr. Brian Sinclair is an architect, and he is the former dean of the SAPL School at Calgary. What makes Dr. Brian Sinclair unique is that he has a background in psychology, so thank you, Dr. Sinclair, for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Nabeel. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you and to be participating in your podcast. So thank you for the invitation.
I want to welcome the show. It will be so interesting to get your insights because we know each other for a little while now. And you've seen urban spaces shift drastically over your time. So from your perspective, design buildings and public spaces evolve. In the last decade, when people's lived experience, functionality, and the broader community needs.
Yeah, no, that's an important question. And I would say for many, many decades, the focus of architecture, actually probably for the last 100 years or so, the focus of architecture has been on aesthetics. It's been on the form of buildings. It's maybe been a little bit superficial, but over the last decade or so, there's been a tremendous shifting of society, expecting from architects and from buildings much more attention to other things that are maybe have been forgotten historically, things like people's needs, lived experience, the diversity of people. We're not designing just for a single person or a single type of person. Increasingly in a place like Canada, there's a richness of users in the built environment. So that's one thing that's changed in a really good way. I would say one of the things that probably isn't so good is there's been a bit of a shift to what is called privatization of public space. So the areas that are available to everyone to use and to sort of celebrate and find happiness are increasingly moving away from being publicly held to being more private spaces like shopping malls and things like that.
Now that's a very interesting perspective, Dr. Sinclair, especially downtown Calgary. That is an element that most people realize that the plastic teams are technically public, but it's private space. So the balance that those needs can be really challenging sometimes.
Yeah, no, that's the good point. Like I was talking about malls, but the Plus 15 is a really good example that you bring up. It's closed at certain times of the day. While they say it's public, it's connecting the buildings. I think for certain types of people, they maybe don't feel welcome or invited or comfortable in those sorts of environments. So in the old days, as in 50 years ago, people would use the street, the sidewalks, and sort of dwell and meet people and shop and do things like that. And then it was lifting it up into the private realm, the Plus 15. People sort of have mixed feelings about that because it in some ways sort of hinders street life. In the other sense, it keeps people warm, but again, it's a very different sort of environment than maybe we might want to have.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point that you're making. I guess I might want to elaborate on that a little bit. So, from your perspective, what makes a place really great? What elements do you think that make a place?
Yeah, so obviously as people who live in cities, you and I, we want to have places that meet our needs on one hand, that are functional, but we also want spaces that make us happy, that lift our spirits, that make us feel good, that make us healthy. Doctors have the Hippocratic Oath, which basically says do no harm. I think architects should, at the very minimum, have a similar sort of thing where they do no harm. But hopefully, we're moving into a world where it's more than just do no harm. It's try and do a lot of good. And we know a lot of research shows us that the way we design our environments can have really positive influences on people, but it can also have negative impacts. The great Roman architect, his name was Vitruvius, talked about firmness, commodity, and delight. So firmness is the strength of buildings, like how strong they are, how the structures. Commodity is their utility. Do they work really well for our needs? But the critical piece, called vanitas, is delight. It's beauty, it's joy, it's all the things that are sort of extra. So when you ask me a question about great spaces, they really need to be more than just functional. They need to also have an element of sort of mystery, joy, magic, beauty, delight.
I love that. But would you say, when you look at, your favorite place, whether in the downtown core, what elements do you think that go unnoticed or are ignored? What would you say would be the missing components?
Yeah.
That go unnoticed or not paid attention to?
Yeah, well, there's many, again, because I think the way that we train architects, we educate architects, and you've seen it firsthand, coming to the classroom and studio, but also the way architecture is practiced. Many things, as I mentioned before, have been, much of the focus has been on aesthetics, it's been on the formal aspects of architecture. But I think the things that maybe need to be attended more, that are sort of forgotten or unnoticed, are things like accessibility, inclusion, quality of light, the presence of green space, all the sorts of things that are more than just pragmatic or basic. And often we live in a world where things are often judged to be successful if they're highly efficient or if they're, low cost. But I think in many cultures that's not the case. Japan or Europe, there's an understanding that yes, buildings and environments have to be functional, but they also have to be more than that. They have to be special. They have to lift our spirits. They have to improve our health. So I think when you talk about things that are unnoticed or forgotten or even abandoned, maybe not by sort of willful neglect, but just not missing it or not knowing. It's those human dimensions that I think are the most important.
Thank you, Dr. Sinclair, and I think that's a perfect segue from the next topic of the element that you speak of is, what I consider quality in the built environment. So you've been leading an exciting initiative called the Living Atlas Equality, which is a national partnership of how we define equity, sustainability, and social value in design. So maybe you could tell the audience what inspired the creation of the project and helping to shape the way that we think about equality in the environment.
Yeah, no, that's a really important question. And the project we're working on, it's a Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council 5-year, what's called a partnership grant, and Pedesting, yourself and Aaron are key partners in that project. A bit about the genesis of that project. So there is about 6 of us, 6 architects, professors of architecture, around the time of the pandemic. We're curious about, are there ways we can design better? Are there policies that can be put into place that result in healthier, sort of happier, more successful environments? So the 6 of us developed a research proposal, and we submitted it to the SHRC, what it's called SHRC, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, looking at quality in the built environment. And the adjudicators or judges came back to us and they said, wait a minute, it's like 2020, architects talking to architects about architecture, it's not going to fly, we're not going to fund you. And they told us, go away, rethink the nature of the built environment, the processes that are involved, who you're trying to address, who you're trying to help. So we held workshops across the country and a lot of discussions. And out of that came a model that said quality in the built environment has got to be the domain of 4 groups. So the researchers, the academics, the government, so municipal government, provincial government, federal government, the design profession, so architects, landscape architects, builders, but critically citizen groups. So groups that are embedded in the community that have deep concern and use the spaces and places every day, but they're usually left out of the equation. So this transdisciplinary and what we call intersectoral models surfaced. We built a proposal around that, and the National Granting Agency came back to us and said, it's a top tier proposal. You're going to receive full funding. So we did get full funding, and sort of the rest is history. We're in year 3 of that project now. And as I mentioned, of course, Pedesting and many other partners like Vibrant Communities Calgary or the Calgary Homeless Foundation or Sustainable Calgary, City of Calgary, the Alberta Association of Architects are all coming together, as they should be. It's a big table, lots of voices, lots of diverse perspectives, asking hard questions about how do we build better cities? How do we make better buildings? Who are we designing for? Who's left out of the equation? Who needs to be in that conversation? So, as you mentioned, issues like inclusivity, equity, sustainability, they're all important, but the sort of fundamental question we're asking is, what is good design? How do we define it? How do we measure it? How do we practice it? And in the end, what is the impact on society?
It being a lot of fun being part of conversations, really enlightening even for myself, broadening my own perspective. And like I said, we are partners in the project, and we often come across spaces that are designed with good intentions, but they still miss the mark. And so, do you think sort of like the roadmaps to equality or accessible quality index help the design community translate things into tangible action for improvement? I know that we are in year 3, but do you think it had or will make an impact on the design community?
Yeah, and I that's a really important question, and I think it already is. Often folks will say, you've got all this money, you have all these people, all these community groups. How come you're not moving faster? So they will say things like, you're looking at homelessness, why don't you solve homelessness? Or you're looking at accessibility, why isn't the whole city accessible? Well, I think the nature of the grant we have is called a partnership grant. Its most fundamental and its highest priority objective is to bring together people into conversation that would normally never be at the same table. So the fact you're in our project, you're bringing your lived experience, your knowledge, your wisdom, your sort of enthusiasm to architects and landscape architects and developers and city government officials, that sort of thing, is important. You're very right when you say that many buildings go up with good intentions. Obviously, developers, the city, architects, no matter what project they're working on, and each project is sort of prototypical. Each building is unique. Each building is a big investment. It's a big investment of time, but also expertise and resources. So nobody wants to do a building that isn't ideal. Again, as we've been talking about, there are certain things that tend to get missed, and it's not out of malice or bad intention. It's good intention, but sometimes the right issues aren't addressed, or there's not a checklist necessarily that covers off all of the things that you and I might say are really valuable. So for example, for you, and you've come to my classroom many times, my studio, you've influenced the students. Many of my students, after you come and visit, they ask the question about their design. Can Nabeel visit here? If it's a single family house, can we have Nabeel here for dinner? Or if it's an office building or a museum, how does Nabeel move around? So that's a sort of increased sensitivity that I think for many architects who were educated in previous generations, sustainability wasn't an issue, accessibility wasn't an issue, diversity wasn't an issue. So I think, society now, as we begin to put up new buildings, and as I say, and as you know, buildings are expensive. They're, once they're in place, they're difficult to change. They're not going anywhere anytime soon. So the more we can sort of front load the design process to deal with not only the good intentions that you're talking about, but evidence and knowledge and principles that ensure Nabeel Ramji can go anywhere in the building. If someone, wants to come to a building and they want to be able to navigate that building, or they want to enjoy that building, regardless of who they are, they should be entitled to that. It should be something that architects should be considering, not just the structure of the building or the function of the building, but how does the building reach out to include everyone? How does it support everyone? How does it contribute to everyone's health, happiness, productivity, all those sorts of things?
No, thank you for saying that, that story about having that impact on the student, but it really helped me to hear, actually. And so, I think I touched on a few elements already, but what would you consider would be the main insights according in the book around that I've discovered in the last 3 years?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. There's been a whole lot of learning. A part of the learning has to do with just shifting the focus from maybe a narrow or superficial set of definitions or metrics to one that is deeper and richer and sort of more attentive to the needs of broader society. So when an architect designs a building, the firm or he or she is working, yes, for the client. Let's say it's a developer, but inevitably the responsibility extends well beyond that client. So if you or I, or maybe together, we're going to go to a building in downtown Calgary, we weren't working with that architect. We're just users of that building. But the architects have to be considering all those people who will be coming into the building, passing by the building, looking at the building from a distance. So some of the learnings that have happened, and I'll give you an example. So for the longest time, architectural awards were decided by guys that look like me, sort of white males, primarily architects. And many awards were given out that way. And the metrics that were used for that were often, what are the aesthetics? What is the materiality? What is the design composition? Or, what are the quality of the spaces? In the last few years, many of the architectural competitions have been shifting gears, and our project has played a role to some degree in some of that shift, from pretty narrow ways of measuring success in the built environment to much broader measures. So for example, let's say the Calgary Mayor's Urban Design Awards. If you look back maybe 10 years, the types of projects that were awarded were pretty narrow. They were more sort of iconic, very dramatic architecture, things like that, or the American Institute of Architects Awards. When you look now, you'll see projects included that are humble, that are modest, that are maybe out of sight. So one example of that is for the American Institute of Architects Canada Society, there was an award program about a year ago. And one of the projects that won a major award is a childcare project in Gastown in Vancouver that was constructed on the top of an already built building. So it was basically leftover space. But the architects and then the project, client had a vision for how to re-energize an otherwise unused space. So that's an example where, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we wouldn't even have thought of that. And nowadays, we're looking at things like innovation, maybe community-based projects, much more modest projects. Not everything needs to be big and shiny and expensive. to be worth our attention and sort of our praise and our sort of celebration.
Yeah, no, that's a great example where we use existing space and reimagine what it could look like. So, I kind of want to kind of build upon that where, how would the designers and developers move from simply moving from, building code to shaping environment that really elevate, dignity, purpose, belonging, or bringing up some of those elements like delight, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so I think, you get to a really good point, which is if we're only working as architects and designers to the building code, it's really a sort of base or lowest common denominator, or even certain policy and regulations, not all of them, but some of them. So I think society as a whole needs to look at both incentives for architects and the built environment developers, the fabricators, the manufacturers of the built environment, to sort of raise that denominator, the lowest common denominator. So incentivizing, but also through regulatory actions as well. And then the project that we're working on is really about quality in the built environment. And it's about lifting society's awareness from K to 12 education to public education to professional education. You, for example, coming in to speak to a group of architects about why the things that your pedestrian is dealing with is important to them. So I think the idea of lifting everything up by increased awareness, by greater sensibility, by heightened sensitivity. Again, North America sort of works to a lowest common denominator, or the lowest sort of baseline budgets and things like that. We talk about value engineering, where we strip out what I would say are maybe the most important things out of buildings in the interest of so-called efficiency. So our project, our Quality in the Built Environment project, one of the things that we in Calgary are doing a lot of is looking at how do we raise sort of the priorities, the respect that folks have around the built environment. How do we make everyone a little more aware of architecture, certainly more aware of why quality of the built environment matters? Because if we just rely on people to make the decisions who are living in a sort of narrow spectrum or swath, so the architects, the bureaucrats, the developers, when we're not including society in a much bigger sense into the equation. And because in Canada, for example, around 90% of people's time is spent indoors.
Oh, wow.
So we need to get it right. Another interesting fact is a very small percentage of the built environment is actually done at the hands of architects. There's lots of smaller projects that are done by builders, lots of projects that use engineers and not necessarily architects. You compare that to some other societies like Japan or parts of Europe. Italy is a good example. An understanding of good design is pervasive in the society, and as a result, society as a whole won't accept lower quality. I think in Canada and in the US, we have a long ways to go, but this project is at least a step in the right direction, especially because it includes not only, as I mentioned, the researchers, but it includes the architects, it includes citizen groups, and it includes the government who handle procurement in many cases. They basically are the ones engaging architects to create public spaces, to create public buildings and that. So it's wonderful that everyone is at the same table. And now as the project is moving forward, we're moving beyond discussions within our group, you and I, for example, to reaching out to the public and having public events, influencing public policy and so forth.
I love the answer of Dr. Sinclair because he talked about, transdisciplinary learning and bringing all these groups together So, everyone would transition to, a bit more practical challenges, it was mentioned that 90% of people spend the time indoors. So, pedestrian and trying to solve that very problem around accessibility, and wayfinding in compact buildings. So, and you will have the tools with fit into the larger picture of urban planning or transformation.
Yeah. So that's another good question. You've got a lot of good questions for me, Nabeel. So just a quick note on the transdisciplinary nature of the project. So in Calgary, our theme is healthy cities. So we've got architects and planners and landscape architects, but we also have folks from the School of Medicine who are looking at public health and environmental determinants of population and public health. We have sociologists, we have social workers. So that on one hand, in terms of transdisciplinarity, enriches or enlarges the conversation in such meaningful kind of ways. When you raise the aspect of pedestrian and the role of digital technology in sort of fitting into discussions about quality of the built environment, or not even discussions, raising the quality of the built environment. So we obviously live in a pretty high-tech world. It would be folly for us as a group of researchers and architects and citizens such as yourself to be pursuing this without including questions around how can advanced technology propel this agenda forward? How can it facilitate not only the project, of course, but end users in the built environment? So for an app like the pedestrian app, it couples together the physical reality of cities with the digital potential to be able to help us understand, to navigate. And pedestrian is about wayfinding. It's about assisting all people to find routes through buildings and routes to the environment that are unimpeded, that are welcoming, that are accessible. So from that point of view, any sort of digital support to our experience of cities and of buildings is really important. We talk about augmented reality, and in many ways, something like pedestrian is a way for us to have a value add or an enrichment. So if I'm encountering a building and I've got the pedestrian app and I can see here's a route through that's easy. If you and I are going out for lunch together, together we can find a way that's going to be manageable, that's going to ensure you're going to be able to get there and not just me. So I think from that point of view, pedestrian and similar sort of applications that look at augmenting, our understanding of the built environment is a really positive thing. And I think it's only going to go further. I think, you and Aaron are sort of at the tip of an iceberg. You're the leaders in this area. But I think when you look downstream, 5 years, 10 years, the way we use smartphones or GPS in our cars, people just do it automatically now. I'm going from A to B. I want to know if there's going to be traffic congestion. I want to know if there's going to be obstacles or construction. Why wouldn't we want people that are experiencing buildings, landscapes, urban areas of the city to benefit from the same sort of thing that you and Aaron have been able to put together? So when you think about something like the pedestrian app, the idea that you have augmented reality, that you can use the power and the potential of advanced technology to help someone, a pedestrian, whether able-bodied or not, navigate through the environment, to wayfind, to know, where there's problems in moving around, is a wonderful sort of thing. So I was thinking about the Waze application. And the Waze application, basically, if I'm on a highway and I see an obstacle, I can put that into the application and say, watch out, there's a big obstacle in the outside lane on the highway. So I was in Washington, D.C., and a friend of mine he rides a motorbike, his life was basically saved because his Waze application on his phone was buzzing and warning him of an obstacle on the road. So if he would have hit it, who knows what would have happened. So that's the power of technology. And we often think of it for driving a car or being on a motorbike. But with pedestrian, and with yourself and Aaron developing this app, it really is bringing into someone's hand as a pedestrian, able-bodied or not, this fuller understanding of the environment than they would otherwise have. So if you and I are going out for lunch together and we don't have any sort of advanced warning that there's a set of 5 stairs to get into the restaurant we want to go to, we're in trouble. If we can have the ability through advanced technology to very quickly see, okay, we want to go to restaurant X for lunch, pedestrian, the app is going to say, okay, well, here's a route. It is accessible. You can get there, and here's the sort of path you're going to have to take. So from my perspective, the coupling of the digital world and the built environment of the physical realm is a natural sort of handshake. It's a really positive thing.
Yeah, like with tools, just a couple of years ago, because quite often I get very anxious going out, opening and be spontaneous, very difficult to do. So I give a hopefully with technology it get people the confidence to go out, be I think represented in society, and it's a better reflection of who we are. So as we look to the next wave of designers and future architects, as someone who shapes their perspectives, what do you hope they take away with them from all your teachings from this research project? What do you want? What is your hope?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And much of my career has been spent shaping future architects. So for the longest time, architectural education, and even to some extent now, has had a focus on the technical aspects, on professional competency is sort of judged maybe in quite a narrow way. So a number of years ago, I wrote a paper called AWOL, Absent Without Leave. And I said the pieces that we're missing in architectural education, accredited architectural education, are business skills, research acumen, and then an understanding of human behavior in the built environment. So, to get to your question, I think all 3 of those things need to be added to the curriculum and the education of architects. I think, like the elective that I teach, it's called Interrogating Quality in Architecture, which you've been a part of. It's a sort of radical rethink of the way we educate architects. So rather than an elective that's just looking at architecture in a narrow way, the course, which includes senior architecture students who are about to graduate, they're in their final semester. The students come into the class and they're not learning about the building code, or they're not learning about a wall assembly, or they're not learning about insulation values. They're having Megan Reed come from Vibrant Community Calgary, or Shane Rempel come from the Calgary Homeless Foundation, or Nabeel Ramji coming from Pedestrian, or David Down coming from the City of Calgary, or Matt Patterson from the Sociology Department doing a walking tour of Chinatown. So through those experiences, students are asked hard questions about what should their priorities be, what has their education taught them so far, what are the gaps in that education. When we talk about you and I going out for lunch and maybe being surprised that you can't get into a restaurant, and the importance of having advance notice that, advance awareness of how we would get to the restaurant, whether you can get in. For many years, sustainability was seen as unique, sort of an add-on. It was quirky, it was just too specialized, and as such, it was relegated to just a few special courses in a school of architecture. Today, in all courses in architecture, in all studios in architecture, sustainability is expected. It's a given, it's pervasive. So many other issues, how we treat all of society, let's say the disenfranchised or homeless people, is important for architects to be considering. And it gets to your question about good intentions, that at the end of the day, the building might not work very well despite those good intentions. So in the area of accessibility, I would imagine a time, not so far away, with guys like you coming in and inspiring students to think differently, where accessibility isn't going to be a concern, because universal design or accessible design benefits everyone. If a space works for you, it works for me, it works for my kids, it works for everyone. So I think the sort of broader agenda in architectural education has got to be broadening the nature of education so that it's not just about a narrow view of a profession, but it's about building good citizens. It's about shaping a self-view and a worldview that automatically is caring and clever and compassionate and considerate. And I don't want to say that things like that aren't happening in schools of architecture or aren't happening in the profession. But the more we can make the design process more qualitative, the more we can make our way of tackling design much more holistic, much more inclusive, much more equitable, much more sustainable, it lifts everyone up. And a building that's good for everyone is obviously a goal that all of us should have. We shouldn't create buildings where people feel left out or lose their dignity or feel in any way unempowered or left behind or excluded.
I love the answer, Dr. Sinclair. So, with that, I wonder, not already answered this, but to see what you would describe, what type of mindset do you think, future architects, all the current designers need to have when you put one to build cities for everyone that you have described?
Yeah. So I think the mindset needs to be one that maybe shifts away from, I'm doing a project for a client and I'm doing a very specific building that is, going to meet the needs of a developer or the city. It needs to rise above that. I think your question about mindset is a really important one. I would hope that any of my students that are graduating with a Master of Architecture degree are going to automatically be thinking about who uses my building, how does my building facilitate, how does it do good, how does it make people's lives better, how do I put up a building that I ensure does no harm but critically does a lot of good. And that could be, from a social perspective. It can also be from an environmental perspective. Buildings should be restorative. They should give back. And, the same goes for, I think, in the social or cultural or spiritual realm. Buildings and built environments, when they're at their very best, when they're sort of in full stride and in what psychologists call in a moment of flow, should be doing really, really positive things. And we know from research that things like daylight, green space, accessibility, those are all things that are only positive. So the more the mindset, getting back to your question, the more the mindset of architects who are doing these buildings for, tens of millions, hundreds of millions or more dollars to put up, and they're going to stay there for 50 years, 60 years, 80 years, 100 years, can do everything they can to front load the design process in a way that considers everyone, not just in a short term, but a longer term view. You and I have talked about before, everyone is sort of in this risk of having challenges in their mobility or their cognitive function or things like that. You'll remember I was on crutches for a semester because I tore a tendon in my knee. Even that experience for me is something that I would want my students to be thinking about. what if something happens to them or their friends or their family? Do they want, that friend or family member to be left out? And again, it boils down to a mindset that is sort of putting front and center human dignity, human well-being, human health, and human happiness.
Wow. Your words today have really inspired me, but I hope it inspires the audience to really rethink how to design and report. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, Dr. Sinclair, and sharing your wisdom and insight into all the amazing work that you do to help make cities better. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nabeel. And I'll just add that every year it's a highlight for my students when you come in and you teach them that, the world needs to be fairer, the world needs to be more inclusive, the world needs to welcome everyone, regardless of their situation. So, thank you for your wisdom and your dignity that you bring